Hi there, and welcome to this very special video interview with Oliver Dyer from Skew for Brands Untapped. This time we are chatting all about licensing and its relationship to fans and fandom. Oliver, thank you so much for joining me.
Pleasure. Nice to see you. Thanks for asking me.
It's always good to catch up with you. So if we kick off, we'll start big with a big question in terms of the future of licensing, but also how fans and fandom is shaping the future of licensing. What are your thoughts on fans' role in what our industry looks like moving forward?
I think they're kind of in the process of upending the industry. If you think about the nuts and bolts of licensing, but kind of by definition, it's top down, or it always has been top down. You need to establish an audience, and if you haven't got an audience, then there's really not much point in extending your brand, whether it's through licensing or any other means. But I think what we're seeing now is the emergence not only of creator-led brands, but creator-controlled brands. And I think because they're retaining control of the IP, it's almost becoming brand extension and licensing is coming from a fan-first perspective.
Yeah, absolutely. And you spoke before about the sort of fan brand space and how our space is really the fan brand space. I think linking to what you've said there, is it that there are sort of new brands coming through that are exciting and are doing exciting stuff in licensing that actually inherently are engaged with fans on maybe a deeper level than certain character brands or other lifestyle brands that have come before it?
Um, yeah, I mean, I think it's not even a deeper level. I think it's just a completely different way of connecting. Like if you think about people like Sidemen from the UK, for example, they've been all over social media, really popular. One of the top five, I think, most subscribed and viewed YouTube channels. They've just done a deal with Paramount for SpongeBob, and I think the numbers are just staggering. And I wonder actually where I think with that deal, both Paramount and Sidemen get kind of like equal footing. Sidemen on YouTube, their audience is way bigger than SpongeBob. But I think what they're both getting out of it is introducing those two brands to new audiences, and that has all come from individual esports stars and gamers getting together, aggregating their followers, cross-promoting to different influencers, YouTubers, and building the following up from there. And everything that they're producing is to their own existing fan base.
Yeah, I'm interested in what you said there as well. Do you think it's the sort of thing that brands, because they're using that example, I think there'll be a lot of other brands looking at that deal, looking at that partnership, and sort of picking apart, what lessons are there to learn from that, or what are the opportunities that maybe get thrown up from that? So do you think it is something that you can build into your, if brand owners are looking at this thinking, we need that sort of level of sort of fan engagement or fan alignment, is that something you need to, that brands can build into their plans when they're looking at brand extensions? Or do you think it has to be like it has been with Sidemen and some of these other brands that come from that space? It's baked in at a DNA level, and that's that. Or do you think actually there are brands out there that are decades old who actually can have a slight reassessment and go, well, how can we cut into that a little bit?
I think brands like Sidemen, Mr. Beast, they've fundamentally almost there's a sense that they've interacted with their fan base on a one-to-one level. It's from the ground up. They've honed their content based on immediate feedback, whereas a lot of the media brands that and media properties that we've grown accustomed to, the evergreens that have been around for ages, they've just not taken that approach. So I do think they're different. I mean, there's lots of ways that brands are doing a really good job of engaging with their fans, but I think from a top down or bottom up approach, I think those two things really are different.
Yeah, absolutely. And is it the sort of thing that from because I'm interested with the actual licensing process, and when you see how these guys are doing merch and doing product, again, there is that fan element and sometimes fan involvement element. And do you think it's a sort of thing where is the licensing industry and the various pockets of it, because I imagine for certain brands that seems like quite a scary prospect to sort of almost invite fans into an element, even if it's something as straightforward as here's 3 t-shirt designs. Fans, what one do you think is the one we should go with? And then we'll tell our, that sort of level. Do you think there is a scope for the licensing industry to embrace that a bit more? And if so, would the results, would the results warrant the extra effort, I suppose?
I think in traditional licensing they definitely are, but I think where it gets really interesting is less about in the existing top-down brands engaging more with their fan base, although they are doing that and they're doing a better job of it, and it's important. But I think it's more interesting to think about where the new brands are going to come, and at the moment they're coming from the gaming community, esports community, and their personality brands. But that's not to say that that's going to be the case in the future. I mean, if you think about how quickly things have moved, like say, for example, from PewDiePie, who was absolutely enormous, like the biggest YouTuber for years, didn't really quite cross over into mainstream consumer products in a way that we are now sort of taking them already for granted with the things that Mr. Beast are doing and Sidemen are starting to do. They've learned really quickly from their predecessors. And it's not necessarily going to be the case that it's only going to be people, personality brands and collectives of people that are going to be the new fan-led, fan-driven brands of the future. It could just as easily be character IP, original game IP that is not only we've had like fan-backed and fan-produced IP along those lines for ages, but I think what the difference is going to be is it's going to be fan-owned. The IP is owned by like a broad number of people. Like if you think about the application of blockchain and tokens in decentralized autonomous organizations, there's been a really great write-up of, you heard of the Spice DAO?
I haven't. No, educate me on the Spice DAO.
So it was a DAO that was set up to buy a rare copy of a version of Dune.
Okay.
And the idea was that they were going to take this image-based version of Dune and turn that into an animation. They got Frank Miller involved. They got script writers involved, and as like in kind of like parallel to a lot of blockchain stories, the whole thing's kind of crashed and burned within the last sort of 6 months. But I think what is interesting about it is that there's money there, there's interest there, and that's with an existing IP, albeit a kind of an offshoot. And who knows whether it actually would have, the lawyers might have got involved. It might have never happened anyway. But I think it's one of the most visible signs recently that original IP can be and will be produced by decentralized organizations, where the IP is spread across, hundreds, thousands, tens of thousands of people, and they've all got a vote in the direction of its development. And the audience for that could be in the millions and views in billions. Well, that's your audience. And so do you really need then at that point, with white label services like Pietra, who can produce new product ranges and white label them? Do you necessarily need the licensing industry as it exists today? There's opportunities there for that type of organization to do a complete end run around it. And I don't think it's going to be either or. I think there's going to be space for both. And as you've seen with Paramount, there's going to be really great and valuable crossovers. But I do think the exciting thing is where the new brands are going to come from. And I think the opportunities and the risks for the licensing industry today is considering that the next great character IP. Well, and here's another example. Imagine Moonbug started. Was the idea for Moonbug was happening today, and was looking at IP that was being developed now. It might be that if Little Baby Bum was just getting a massive following, that IP might be tied up within a decentralized autonomous organization. And instead of selling the rights to a company to exploit it in the way that we're accustomed to, that DAO might well choose, if it was well run and had really clued up and connected people in it, might choose to exploit it itself and spread some of the value around its fan base.
Yeah, no, it's really interesting stuff, and it does throw up questions about how, like you say, fundamental questions about how the licensing industry runs, and the formats that are in place to facilitate how the industry works at the moment. And I think, like what you're saying there, is obviously that brings fans, closer to brand owners and sort of side by side with brand owners in a way, like I say, that maybe a lot of brand owners aren't used to. So do you think there's also an argument for, we see it at the moment, if we're looking at fan-led conventions or shows where it's all about fans getting up close and personal with the creators behind brands, and also obviously merch is a huge part of that as well. When you go to Comic Cons and things like that, there is obviously licensed merch and unlicensed merch as well there at those shows. So do you think there's an opportunity potentially where, if we look at our own licensing shows, and obviously that's not, they're not fan first, they're not encouraging consumers to come in and check out stuff, it's not sort of what that's built for, but do you think there could be an appetite or an area where those sort of shows maybe become closer to each other, and there's a maybe a bleeding of what they're all about, so that there is actually scope and an appetite and a reason for fans to come to the licensing industry, know more about the licensing industry, and actually meet brand owners in a way that lets our industry be on the front foot, sort of be leading these sort of things? I
think so. I think, I mean, goodness only knows what an organizational nightmare that would be to make that happen. I'm under no illusions about how difficult it would be, but just like on the face of it, I think the idea of the industry opening up and presenting itself to the consumer more openly, I think would be a really great thing. I think just from an attendee perspective, it would be amazing to see people in cosplay walking around the show floor at BLE, and I think that would influence the stand design. It would influence the type of people who are there. It wouldn't just be buyers, licensees, and IP owners. It would influence the way that product is shown. It would open up opportunities to get feedback for consumer products and services that are on the stand. I think, but most importantly, I think it's the mentality shift. I think that it's not. The reality is that it isn't producers and consumers anymore. That line is so blurred in almost all aspects of entertainment, sports, heritage, any part of the industry. Probably one of the few places where it's really siloed off is the trade shows at the moment.
Yeah, and actually, I think there's probably an argument that there's definitely been talks at trade shows and certain showcases that you sort of think, actually, there's probably a large slice of that fan base would be interested in hearing about that, in the same way that I know we've spoken before about even something like style guides. There's potentially an argument to be said that there's fans of certain brands might love to see those, or maybe even buy them, and that there's a whole part of the industry that actually fan communities might be interested in seeing.
I think that that's already happening. I think when Skew started, the information and the insight that was in style guides was kept very close to people's chest. We weren't allowed to share anything for 18 months, 2 years. That's contracted and contracted and contracted, and now we're seeing some clients sharing what we've done in the public domain almost immediately. We ourselves are doing a lot of testing directly to fans and using that to inform the design in some cases, and we know that clients are doing that. Some of them have got their own platforms where they're sharing designs with fan networks and getting feedback. So yeah, I think it's going to happen more and more. But also with the whether it's organizations, decentralized autonomous organizations, or whatever the shared IP model is, that group of people don't necessarily need the tools and processes that we're using at all. They don't need a style guide to know to have their fans choose from a range of t-shirt designs that they want to use a white label company to produce. They can just go ahead and do it, put their branding on it, and they've got the startings of a consumer products line.
And then I'm interested in terms of how it's impacted, you guys as well, in terms of all this. Obviously, not all of your clients are going to be, coming from the esports space and be at this stage that some of the brands we've spoken about are. So have you found that it has changed how you're working with brands, how brands are engaging with you? Has it impacted your sort of approach to this sort of stuff?
Yeah, I think just in the sense of the speed at which information is used. I think as I mentioned earlier, the way that we approach trends. Skew was the first company to introduce the trending process into the licensing process back when we started 20 years ago. It was really quickly became an essential part of asset pack development for particularly soft lines, fast fashion, but also included in core guides. What we're seeing now is, and that was because of the, I should say, the nature of how trending worked at the time. There was huge long lead times because yarn dyers needed to know colors so that textiles manufacturers could make the cloth that would go on the catwalk, that would then influence high street and so on, which was a much longer process. Now it is immediate. Clothes are produced in days based on social media data. And so if there is every trend happening somewhere in the world concurrently, what sense does it make to have monumental, monolithic guides going out over a very long period of time? Everything needs to be much quicker. So for us, it's about instead of working on a guide with a client, dropping it, and then perhaps walking away for 18 months, it's working much more closely with their teams, building up information over a longer period of time, and developing presentations, even down to like specific pitches, so that everything is as fresh as it can possibly be.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense in terms of it helps brands be agile. I suppose they need to be agile, don't they? Now it's that thing of there could be a trend that pops up tomorrow that can impact several brands, and if you're glued to a certain guide, and it must be a challenge as well, because like I say, having putting in place the process that those sort of things are agile, and let's say it's not just that sort of here is what you're wed to for a certain number of time. That's yeah, but also a very exciting thing for brands, because it on paper makes it, from a commercial point of view, means they can jump on stuff when it happens, and they're not as sluggish, I suppose.
Yeah, exactly. It's the difference between going to a meeting with Primark with one fast fashion asset pack that you pull together, crossing your fingers that this is exactly what that buyer's looking for at that exact moment, and instead doing the research, seeing what is working for them right now, and going in, demonstrating the range that your IP can deliver. What I mean is how elastic it is, and showing how your IP can make sense for the retailers market, and give them a range of different looks that could work, that that is working for them right now.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, before you go, you've spoken before, and you've written before very eloquently about fan brands and the fan brand industry, and dropping the L word if we can. And I suppose to end on that point, I suppose everything we've spoken about now, and the sort of shifts that are taking place, and the way that fans are influencing the licensing and all sort of stuff, I suppose that backs up this idea that putting fans very much at the heart of everything we're doing, even down to the way we talk about our industry, might actually end up being quite important.
Things are moving so quickly, and the way that we see it at Skew is that if even only a small amount of the promise of decentralized autonomous organizations, new brands coming up through a shared ownership model, the means of creating IP, the cost of the means of doing that all trending to zero, with the new tools that are available for people to use. That's all pointing to a future where there's going to be more IP being developed by a much wider group of people than it has been in the past. And it's more is going to come up from the bottom and less going to be fed from the top. And that, coupled with new routes to market that are already established and other ones that are forming, I just think, or it seems irresponsible to think that that the licensing model is going to be at everything. That's, I think, is where we come from. We think engaging with fans more now is a way of hedging against the licensing industry's future irrelevance. Now, I don't think that's going to be the case. I don't think it's going to become irrelevant. I don't think, I just think that licensing isn't going to be irrelevant, but the license isn't going to be everything. And that's a big difference. At the moment, the way that we categorize ourselves, the license is everything. And the future, to me, looks like that it's just going to be a part of how we deliver new goods and services alongside fans, not to fans.
Yeah, and that's a huge opportunity. That's something to be excited about rather than
yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I think the future is really exciting.
Yeah, amazing. Well, Oliver, thank you so much for this. I always leave our chats feeling smarter and more excited about brands and all that sort of stuff. So thank you so much for taking time out. Thank you guys for watching, and we'll all hopefully catch up very soon.